computer. Voting in progress. Okay, great. So first of all, welcome back. It's been a while since we've met in this way, and I am grateful for your presence here to join me in on this journey as we talk about God. And this is clearly one of the subjects that is very near and dear to my heart, not only because I'm a rabbi, but because I've been struggling with how to understand God and how to seek God and the language to use to talk about God for basically my entire life, and I'm still on that journey. And I presume that you all are as well. Just a quick show of hands. Not everybody has their video on, but a quick show of hands. How many of us have a difficult time understanding God? Great. Okay. Yes. Thank you for that's at least of the people with video on. That's unanimous. So that's good news, because the goal here is to give us all a sense of what is the language that has been used for God historically throughout Jewish history, and to use that as a jumping off point to get to a place where we might feel at least more comfortable talking about that language. My goal here is not, our mission is not to tell you what to believe. I'm going to leave that up to you, because beliefs are obviously very personal, particularly about God. I might tip my hat here and there about my own personal beliefs, but this is really about, like I said, giving us language, showing how God has been presented in the past. Let me dispel any notions that the ancients, that our ancient ancestors were any more certain about God than we are. I think that's likely not the case, because let's face it, human beings have always had difficulty understanding or speaking about or believing in things that they cannot necessarily see. Now, there are many perspectives on God throughout Jewish history. We're going to approach them in a kind of a systematic way, but the goal is to look at how God has been portrayed historically, starting with the Tanakh, obviously, but to look at the characteristics, the attributes that we've ascribed to God, the values that God seems to hold, perhaps God's appearance. There are some suppositions about that throughout Jewish history as well. We might talk a little bit about items like covenant and theological items, the relationship between us and God, and also quote unquote miracles. We're going to, as I said, we're going to travel along the timeline, and that's really important. Any of you who've learned with me before, which at this point is probably, I think, everybody here, knows that I love timelines, and it's absolutely essential for us to talk about timelines because it sort of gives us a sense of where we've been and we're going. Can everybody see the timeline that I've just put up? Okay, that's great. I can only see a few of you, so I hope you can see that. This is, some of you have seen this before. I use this at every class. A basic timeline of Jewish history that only covers the last 3,000 years. And there is, there was certainly Jewish history prior to 3,000 years ago as well. But we start basically with the biblical period. The biblical books are written, from around the 13th century BCE until around the 3rd or 4th century, maybe even the 3rd century BCE.
Yeah. Can you make it full screen?
Sorry, say that again?
Could you make it full screen?
Oh, I can. You know what?
At the top, I think there's.
I can make it. I don't know that I can do that. Hold on. Yeah, I'm not so great at these things, so I don't know that I can do much better. But I'll tell you what.
That's better. That's better.
I'm happy to send this to anybody who wants the PDF. But in any case, biblical period is back in here. That's where we're going to be spending our day today, our hour today. The rabbinic period, and this is generally we're speaking about Mishnah and Gemara and Midrash to some extent. We're going to do cover in our next session, which is the first Tuesday in December. will be in here. Medieval period covers a long area, many centuries in here, but we'll be looking at some key characters and their takes on God in this period. And then the final two sessions we're going to spend in the early modern and then contemporary periods to talk about, again, contemporary perspectives on God, which might be most relevant to us. But in order to get to the right end of the timeline, we have to start at the left, because you have to have the language and you have to know what's been said in order to be able to discuss moving forward. Can I suggest, I'm hearing a lot of noise. It might be a good idea if those of us who are, if you have a question, you should unmute, but otherwise, please keep yourself muted. That would be very helpful. Okay, so the goal is, like I said, to sort of cover Jewish history moving forward from the Tanakh. I want to make a brief note about language. So one of the goals here, again, like I said, is to give us language about which we can use, about which we can talk about God. The first thing that is sort of an interesting conversation for contemporary people is, of course, the use of pronouns, how we refer to God. And you may notice that contemporary rabbis, such as myself, often try to avoid using masculine language for God, because of God, of course, God is a reflection of every gender. Ancient language, however, pretty much exclusively refers to God as male, in masculine language. So you'll see a lot of masculine language, but that doesn't mean that we have to assign God any particular to say that God is anything like that. However, you'll just be aware that that's something that's out there. Another thing is that the words that we use when referring to God vary tremendously. So there is, of course, the English word God, which is not really a name of God, it's worth noting, but rather is God's job title, you might say. And words like that will come up frequently are words like Elohim and Adonai and Yud He Vav He. In fact, the Sefaria uses, you'll see the Sefaria sheet that I've designed for this session. It doesn't even translate that in the English. It just writes Yud He Vav He in the Hebrew in the middle of the English. So we'll see that. Adonai, of course, is a euphemism that our ancestors developed. Adonai literally means my Lord. But of course, in prayer, we use it because we know that God's actual name is too holy. God's actual name, of course, we don't for sure know how it was pronounced. It was certainly spelled Yud He Vav He. Some scholars believe it would have been pronounced Yahweh, and there are various reasons why we believe that. It doesn't matter so much. There are other euphemisms as well, Hashem, etc. I'm not so fond of that. Hashem literally means the name. I think it's okay to use. I know there are some people in Jewish life who prefer not to use God's name. I'm comfortable with saying Adonai or Elohim and not worrying too much about modifying them slightly, so that, so just be aware of that. Also, by the way, as an aside, I'm also, while I avoid writing the Hebrew terms Elohim and Yud He Vav He on pieces of paper that will be thrown away or erased. In English, I don't have a problem with writing out Elohim, Elohim, which is, I don't think really in English letters is not really problematic. So anyway, I'm not big on hyphens. People spell G-D. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to do that, because, like I said, God is not God's name. So it's not such a big deal. I understand that that's a sensitivity that some have in Jewish life. And that brings me to the final point, which is the most important thing for these sessions, is to be sensitive to the beliefs of others. So we're going to have I'm sure we have, even just within this relatively small group, we have a wide range of beliefs or understandings about God. Please try not to diss anybody else's opinions. You might, in fact, when we do get to opportunities to weigh in about our own personal ideas, we might want to do it just knowing that somebody's probably going to disagree with you. That's okay. The whole point is to actually look at the language that we use and how we use it, and what that kind of means in terms of our own personal understanding, so that we might better achieve a way of understanding or talking about God ourselves. So just be open, don't be dismissive of anybody, try to be sensitive, and understand that we're all on our own independent journey regarding God. I'm sure that if I were to ask a similar question, how many of us feel that our understanding of God has changed over our lifetimes, we'd probably all raise our hands as well, because most of us are not stuck in any one particular metaphor or understanding, a way of understanding God. So no judgment on anybody's beliefs. I will not tell you what to believe. I'm hoping to help you gain some more language to be able to approach this somewhat more thoughtfully. That's really the goal here. Any questions before we get started? That was all by way of introduction. Well, let me just say this. If you have a question, raising your hand may not work because I may not see you when there's like the share screen going on. So if you have a question, you really need to ask, just unmute and go ahead and try to get my attention. And that might be the way to do it. So before we get started in earnest, I want to make sure that we say the bracha for Torah study. If you've not recited that bracha already today, it is the most important mitzvah in Jewish life to fulfill the mitzvah of Torah study, to learn some Torah every day. And so that bracha ends la'asok b'divrei Torah, for engaging with the words of Torah. So please, if you could recite with me, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Good. Okay, so today, as I said, we're going to start back in the Tanakh, and in particular in the Torah. Now, I'm going to share with you. I have a sheet that is I have a Sefaria sheet that let me just copy this link here. I have a Sefaria sheet that has our sources for today, and I'm going to put that in the to chat. I'm going to put this in the chat right here. So you can open that up yourself. I'll also have it on screen as I go through it. But if you'd like to open up yourself and of course refer to it later or while we're going along, that works as well. So if you're, by the way, and if you're not familiar with Sefaria, you really should be. It is a tremendous resource for many texts, if not virtually all texts in Jewish life. Certainly all the best ones are there, and they continue to add texts. And it is, if you ever want to look something up or see what other types of source sheets that people put together on any subject in Jewish life, you can find it on Sefaria, and it's worth knowing about. So that is sefaria.org. You can see up there at the upper left. Okay, so to start out with, now I've as is usual, I've prepared way too much material. So sometimes I might be trying to breeze through this fairly quickly. The goal here, especially in the Tanakhic material, we'll have more time when we get to the rabbinic and the later discussions to discuss more. The key item here is to ask the question, what is the text from the Torah or from the Tanakh? What is it telling us about God? Okay, what is it telling us about God's attributes? What is it telling us about God's values? What is it telling us about perhaps at least biblical theology? Now, the hard part is that it's really hard for us to be able to separate ourselves from what we already know. And, we've all heard lots of stuff about God. So we're going to try to strip back what again, I know this is very hard. We're going to try to look at what the text itself says without thinking too deeply about what Rashi says about it or about how you might understand that today. And we're looking just at the simplest form of textual interpretation. Now, that's also impossible because, as you may know, Hebrew is written in an ancient language that we don't entirely understand. And every now and then there are words and turns of phrase that just don't make any sense, even in the biblical language. So we're going to be relying to some extent on the translation, which is already, by the way, a step away from the original meaning, but I'll do the best that I can to try to when necessary, if there are things that are unclear, to try to give us what we think, at least from a scholarly perspective, what the Torah might have been saying in its time. Okay. So the first thing, and this is actually, I'm not going to start where you expect me to start. I'm going to start rather with the main reason that we're here, which is that we are Yisrael. Can I solicit people to read? Would that be okay? I'm just going to go according to the pattern of who's on my screen. And Linda's first. Linda, would you be willing to unmute and read the first verse there we've got there from Genesis chapter 32, verse 29?
Sure. Said he, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human and have prevailed.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So this is, of course, in the context where Jacob wrestles with an angel. I don't need to give you much more context than that, but it's a sort of a pivotal moment in Yaakov's identity. And he asks the angel, "What's his name?" Jacob asked the angel, "What is your name?" And the angel says, "You can't. Yeah, I can't tell you my name. However, you get a new name for having wrestled with me." And what does he say? Ki im Yisrael, ki sarita im Elohim ve'im anashim va'tuchal. So your name shall no longer be Jacob, but rather it should be Israel. And this is also a curious construction. I can't really get into it, but ki sarita im Elohim. And that word sarita there, you can see has the sin and the resh that you find in the word Yisrael. Now, if you know anything about Hebrew, you know that Hebrew has a 3-letter root system, and when you hear Yisrael, there actually is, if you parse that word, the last 2 letters, Aleph and Lamed, that's a name for God. It's like Elohim or Eloheinu. El is the simplest form of the name for God, and Yisra or something like that seems to be related to this word sarita. They share 2 root letters. It's possible that there was another root letter that we don't know about. Doesn't really matter. But in any case, Yisrael seems to mean he is the one who struggles with God. He is the one who struggles with God. So Jacob is given this title after having wrestled with the angel, but it is the name for our people for all time. We are the people that struggle with God, and that's kind of a sort of a little postulate here, and it makes sense for the context in which we find ourselves asking the question: how do we understand God? We continue to struggle. Okay, let's move on. Paul, would you read it? This is a short one, but can you read Genesis 1:3 there? Obviously, we just read this in the Torah 2 weeks ago.
God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Okay, so the introduction that we have with God in the Torah is that God creates the world. And how does God create the world? Nothing about God's hands fashioning things, really just God says things and they come into being. Those of you who are early morning daveners know that the first thing that we say at the beginning of Pesukei de Zimra every morning of the Jewish year is Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam. Praised is the one who spoke and the world became. That's what that means. And we say that every morning, and every morning is a reminder of creation. But the lesson that we learn from this is obviously that God creates stuff, right? In particular, God created the world. All right. Again, we're only going, like I said, we're going to breeze through this. You might want to, when we get deeper into it or toward the end, I'm going to ask you all to sort of recall the kinds of things that we learn about God in reading these passages. So the first thing we learn, God creates. Paul, that was a short one. Could you read the next Genesis 1:26? Same, we're still in creation.
Sure. And God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth."
Okay, so what's curious about that verse? Notable? Somebody got to just unmute if you got an answer.
I mean, the idea that God has an image and God's form looks like a person.
Okay, so that's one thing. Definitely that God is created, that we are created in God's image. So that obviously suggests something about God, right? That God has an image, and maybe it's something like us. Maybe.
Let us make humankind. It's the plural.
Okay, so that's the other thing that's curious about this, is that God's speaking in the first person plural. Na'aseh in Hebrew, we shall create, or let us create. It's the grammarians would call that a jussive. Let us create. Na'aseh adam talmenu. We let us create God in our image. Now, is God using the royal we here, or is there something else? We don't know. There are definitely theories about that we're not going to talk about from much later. But it sounds like either God speaks in the first person plural sometimes, or God was speaking to others who were around God at the time. Okay. Anything else that can? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Rabbi, I think they're talking about the royal we.
Okay, right. Yes, it could be the royal we, but again, we don't know. All we know is what we have in this very ancient text. And by the way, these passages of Bereshit would go back pretty far. So at least 2,600 years. So it's long time. What else do we see in this verse, by the way? One more thing about humanity. We have a special role, right? In addition to being created in God's image, we are going to rule. Okay, now, again, this is tempered somewhat in the second creation story, but God has a role for humans that is sort of different from the animal kingdom. Let's move on. Next on my screen is Chris. Would you be willing to read Genesis 2:18 there?
God said, "It is not good for the human to be alone. I will make a fitting counterpart for him."
Okay, now this is very interesting. What does this tell us about God? It says something about humanity. Go ahead.
That he's not alone, that he, she, it, whatever it is more than a single entity.
That God understands loneliness. God understands what it means to be alone. Okay.
Yes.
Well, we don't know. Again, we don't know. Maybe based on the previous verse that we read, maybe God has company. We're not clear on that. But God certainly, not only does God understand what it means to be alone, God feels for the first person, the first man, and says, "Oh, he's lonely. I got to make somebody else for him." Right? Which suggests, that God has feelings, I guess you might describe it that way. God feels something. And also, God has, I guess you'd call it sympathy, but also that God understands loneliness and God cares. God cares about this human being enough to say, aha, this is a person, if I were that guy, I'd want somebody else around. Okay? So God cares. All right? Anything else we could glean from that?
Yeah, Rabbi, I just, it seems to me that if God is God is not monolithic, I don't think, I mean, if God has that empathy for a creatures that he created, then there must be a part of him, her, of it, that listens to the another part of itself.
Okay,
that says.
Yep. Go ahead.
It listens to another part, like the way a man and a wife listen to each other.
Right. So again, we don't know. We don't know who God is conversing with, but yes, there's some kind of conversation going on within God. Let's say that sort of plays into Kabbalistic concepts, which we will surely talk about probably when we get to the medieval period. But yes, God is having a conversation, and it's right. Who's God speaking to? We don't really know. But God is talking out loud and saying and in expressing God's empathy, as you put it. Good. Let's.
Rabbi.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought there was one other thing when we were talking about names and how God used words to create the world, to create us. I think that I want to say it was giving us the idea that as words were important to him, they are also important to us.
Absolutely.
So that we need to learn to use them properly. Okay.
Great.
So if you're saying the lesson, if Adam.
You're saying the lesson of creation is that if words are so important because God brings into the world by speaking, therefore we should understand the value and power of words as well. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And yes, and also the fact that when you have I forget which part it is, but when you talk about vows, about taking vows, you're promising something, with the gift that God gave you to make that promise.
Great, fantastic.
Okay.
Right, there's a lot in the Torah about vows. So both the in the Torah and of course I think, by the way, if anyone here is in doing Daf Yomi, I think they've just started Tractate Nidarim, which is all about vows. It's very interesting. But thank you for that, Eileen. Tell you what, we're gonna move on.
Yeah.
Alva, you're next on my screen. Would you be willing to read Genesis 3:8?
Oh, me?
Okay, no, Alva Daphner, but we can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh,
Unmute.
There we
Alan.
go. Yes.
There. They heard the sound of Adonai moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day, and the human and his wife hid from Adonai among the trees of the garden.
Okay, so this is I love this. In fact, I'm not going to talk about Rashi, but Rashi uses this verse as an opportunity to explain his own philosophy about how he interprets, not about theology, but about how he interprets text. But what does this suggest? Thank you, Alpha. What does this suggest about God? If God is moving about in the garden, God has a body, right?
Well, maybe just a breeze.
Okay, maybe, yes, maybe this, well, the Hebrew is actually complicated because it's not clear what leruach hayom means. And the translation here is also poorly it doesn't really capture necessarily the confusion in the Hebrew, but yeah, they hear the voice of God who's walking, and it's not clear, by the way, if it's God who's walking around or if it's God's voice that's floating around through the breeze. We don't know. All we know is that there's some kind of physical presence. Maybe we don't even really know that. And also, what do we learn about the humans here that God has created?
They regard God with fear.
Yeah, a little bit of fear there. God is kind of a scary character. Maybe oh, look what's coming. It's going to go hide. Like that kind of thing. It's definitely it is there's a lot there about the relationship between God and people. We're gonna get out of creation though, because again, I got a lot of material to get to, and I remember our goal is just to see what each of these, if there's anything notable that we can take away from each of these passages. Eileen, you're next on my screen. Would you be willing to read these couple of verses from? This is from the end of the Noach story, which we just read this past Shabbat.
oh, wait, just a second. Wait, I'm sorry, I have to get back to my other screen here.
Okay.
Okay, is that Genesis 9:13-17?
Yep, that's the one.
Is it? Yeah, okay. Okay, I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature among all flesh, so that the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on earth. That, God said to Noah, shall be the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on earth.
Okay, great. So what's the word for covenant?
Brit.
Brit. Exactly. We mostly think of that word. We mostly think of that word in the context of circumcision. That is Brit Milah, which is actually a different kind of covenant. This is the first covenant that God creates with humanity. This covenant with Noach, in particular, God's promise that God will not destroy the world again. What does this tell us about God? I mean, yes, it does tell us that when we see the rainbow, we're supposed to remember that covenant. But what else? What does it tell us about God?
This verse has always told me that God is capable of learning.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, God is also capable of having regret.
Right. Yeah. God regrets having destroyed the world. God learned a lesson. Right after this creation, which God thought was perfect. By the way, we didn't read any of that, but God thought all of creation was good, and then wait a minute, I guess it didn't turn out so well. So yes, God learned something. God regretted. God changed on some level. Right. Anything else? There's a lot here. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Yeah, I read an interesting interpretation this week about Parshas Noah. That when he landed, when the ark landed on wherever Mount Ararat, instead of witnessing what everybody would think after a station and mud and goo and everything messy everywhere, but rather the speculation that the world was made clean again, so that all he saw was fragrant trees and grass and mountains and whatever, and everything was just lovely except there were no people.
Right. I want to thank you for that. That's very nice. The only I'm trying to avoid the later interpretations just to see what we can glean about this from the original biblical text. We will get to later understandings as well. But yes, that is it's always nice to share a little Torah. But yeah, there is certainly in any case what we can glean from this is that there is a possibility that God can create a covenant with human beings, or actually it says here, my covenant, the brit, is between me and you and every living creature. God understands that God has certain obligations to creation, to all the creatures that God has made, not just humans, and that brit, this idea of covenant, is an essential part of that. By the way, ancient, so biblical scholars of this period, the idea of brit, you should know that the idea of brit is a very important idea throughout contemporary literature of the time. It has to do with contracts and so forth, and God is capable of making contracts. We have lots of examples in the ancient world of contracts, and this is sort of related. It's a little different from like a business contract, but it is
in
some sense the same idea. Let's tell you what. Let's move on.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Is the word for rainbow, is it the same? The translation just says bow. So is a bow as in a bow and arrow? Is it the same word?
Yeah, you can see in the Hebrew there, it says, Et kashti natati ba'anan. The Hebrew word for rainbow or bow is keshet. But keshet literally means an arc, but it can refer to, even in contemporary Hebrew, a keshet also means a rainbow. I think when if you want to be specific, you can say keshet be'anan in Hebrew means a bow in the clouds. In the clouds.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Let's move on to, this is a passage that we encountered on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Perhaps one of the most interesting theologically speaking, but there are some lessons here from Genesis chapter 22. Actually, Pat, you're next on my screen. Would you be willing to read this one sometime afterward?
Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test, saying to him, Abraham. He answered, here I am.
Now, it's interesting, of course, that God feels that he needs to test Abraham, right? Why should Abraham need to be tested? Again, I think perhaps if we figure what happens later, I mean, perhaps God is trying to just ascertain that Abraham is the right one to be the father of his chosen people. But in any case, what is this little back and forth when he says Avraham and he answers Hineni? What's the what might we read from that? Any thoughts?
I'm here and I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm. That perhaps Abraham has this sense of brit, that he has this sense of covenant, connection with God, which, when God calls, you got to answer. I'm ready. Here I am. Certainly something. Mm-hmm.
It's different from what we just read about Adam and Eve. He's not afraid. He's comfortable, or he sees his obligation to answer God.
Great, fantastic. Yes, he's not running away. He's there. He's fulfilling my my charge to you all to be there. Hineni, I am here, he says. But okay, Pat, would you mind actually reading the next passage, which is the end of the Akedah, the end of the Binding of Isaac story.
The messenger of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I swear, Adonai declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore. and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command.
So this is also Brit covenant language that we'll see repeated in multiple places, and God reaffirms this Brit, this covenant, not only with Abraham, but also with his son Isaac and with Jacob as well. And that's language that's going to continue for forever, basically, but throughout the Torah, that of God reestablishing or reaffirming this sense of, I'm going to give you this. Now here, what's of course missing is, well, a covenant has to have it's a two-sided, it's a two-way street. So this is of course hundreds of years before, again according to the biblical chronology, of when the Torah would have been given, because of course that's in Moses' time, after they've gone down into Egypt and so forth. But this is the sort of the beginning of that covenant between God and Israel, which is obviously an essential part of the biblical narrative. Any other interesting things to be gleaned from this?
I'm interested to notice that actually God is not the one speaking, it's his messenger.
Oh, right. Yes. That by the way, so that comes up a lot. And we see this a lot. We'll see another example. Oh, actually, I think I took that one out, but there are other examples where God has, I had to try to be judicious about this. God sometimes speaks for God's self. Sometimes God speaks through some kind of an angel. Remember that it's not clear that a malach, an angel, that word literally means messenger. It's not clear that angel actually really is, if it's a part of God, it's certainly not a distinct being in the way that humans are distinct from God. There seems to be, so sometimes they can be interchangeable in the biblical narrative, whether it's God speaking or an angel speaking. We saw this with Jacob earlier, when Jacob was wrestling with the angel. Who's he actually wrestling with? He's wrestling with God, or so says the angel. So just worth noting that there seemed that idea of these holy beings that are created as messengers, they're sort of, they are connected to God, and they are sometimes an intermediary with humans. We're going to move on to Shemot, Exodus. And this is a very important passage here. Let's see, Lynn's already. Mindy, would you be willing to read? We're at Exodus chapter 3, verse 2.
A messenger of Adonai appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When Adonai saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. And God said, Do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. And continued, I am the God of your father's house, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God.
So some things that we see emerging here that we've already seen. Moses is afraid to look at God. We also see, of course, this reaffirmation of the connection to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, so there's that Brit language. And also, what does Moshe say when God calls him? Hineni, here I am. So yes. But perhaps the most curious thing about this passage is, of course, how is God appearing to Moshe? He's appearing this burning bush. Some of you may know, I don't think they use this anymore, but it was the symbol of the conservative movement for a long time. Like if you went to Camp Ramah, they had the logo was the burning bush. By the way, and what does the text say related to our last passage? What does it say about who's actually appearing here? Vayar malach Adonai. A messenger, Vayera. A messenger of Adonai appeared to him in the blazing fire out of the bush. But again, who's actually doing the speaking? It seems to be God, but God is speaking from this bush, but it's also kind of this messenger. So again, what is a malach? We're not really sure. What is an angel? We're not sure. But it's certainly the way that God is communicating with Moshe. Now, it's worth noting, and one of the things that we'll see over the course of the Torah, and for the rest of the Tanakh as well, is that God gets further and further away from humanity. That is to say, in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, God, the humans see God walk, or maybe hear or feel, detect God's physical presence walking through the garden, and they both hear God's voice. When we get to this point, there's this bush business. Now, of course, when Moshe goes up on Mount Sinai in a little bit, then he will actually speak to God face to face. But the Torah is also going to tell us that he's the last person to do so. Notably. So it's as if God starts off very close to humanity, and you see this gradual distancing. Gradually, God is getting further away. First, he's talking to people face to face, then he's talking out of a bush, and then the prophets are only going to sort of hear his voice, or it's going to be placed in their mouth or something like that. So that's something we see here. Let's see, who's next? Sheldon, would you be willing to read the beginning of this is the beginning of the 10 Commandments passage. I didn't put the whole thing, but some of it. So how do we perceive God here?
God spoke all these words, saying, I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of your God, for Adonai will not clear one who swears falsely by God's name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
Okay, so again, we've got here the first couple of commandments. Although sometimes it's hard to draw the lines with these first commandments, and in fact, different religious traditions divide this passage differently. But a lot here to be said about God. What are some observations that you all see?
I'm troubled by this. I guess I knew this, but I guess I prefer not to think about it. Visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children. I didn't think that was, given our strong tradition of teshuvah. This seems a little bit harsh to me.
Right. So what you are seeing, and again, we're trying to look at the unvarnished Torah here, but what you are detecting is a conscious editing on the part of the rabbis in later generations to de-emphasize that passage. And we'll see this again later when we talk about the 13 merciful attributes of God, which is also in the Torah. But yes, what else? There's another word in here, that word impassioned. Which in Hebrew is El Kana. Where is that in Hebrew? Right, etc. Anyway, the word is El Kana. I'm a jealous. Oh, there it is. I am a jealous or zealous God. The word Kana or lekane in Hebrew can mean either jealousness or can mean zeal. So in any case, I'm a God with strong passions. And that's not always, that can be positive or negative. And so the image of God that is presented here is one of a God that feels not just feels sympathy or empathy for humans, but also can get angry. And we know that certainly in the Torah that happens multiple times. Okay, so we've got that. We've got this business about the third and fourth generations and showing kindness. Some might point to the fact that even though it says the third and fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation. That is to say, you could read that as saying that God's mercy and kindness last much longer. Perhaps, again, not necessarily, certainly, but we might read that as, well, if you stay connected to me, I'm going to be with you forever. If you reject me, I'll be out of your life in 3 or 4 generations. But in any case, so there's that. I included the last line about remembering the Sabbath day. It's interesting to me that the Sabbath is right there. That the first way that we act on any of this stuff, which up till now is, you might say, intangibles. Well, there's the not making idolatry, but the first intangible here, something that you shall do, is keep Shabbat. is to remember the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is clearly intimately connected to this relationship. Clearly, and again, remember this is establishing our part of the covenant, this brit. So God is saying, okay, I'm going to give you some stuff, and here's your responsibility. So we are partners in this brit, in this covenant with God. Any other observations here? Or
Well,
questions?
the images,
Mm-hmm.
or no images, please.
Right. The thing about not making yourself that's generally understood to be idols. Also, by the way, and before that, lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai, do not, you shall have no other gods before me. What does that suggest, by the way?
That there are other gods.
There are other gods, and that our God, being a jealous God, is not going to stand for that. You got to stay away from those other gods. Now, didn't we all learn in Hebrew school that there's only one God? Don't we say that? We say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad. There is a hero Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Aren't we monotheists? Doesn't that by definition exclude the possibility that there are other gods? Well, yes.
No, it does. No, I don't believe it does. I don't believe it does.
So right, it not explicitly, not necessarily. Somebody else was trying to say something there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One at a time.
What I think is very interesting is the very beginning of this passage, where God identifies himself as if there were other gods that could be floating around. I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt, opposed to Baal, who might not have gotten you out of Egypt.
Now, remember, of course, also the Israelites have just come out of Egypt, where they've been exposed to a whole lot of idolatry or multiple gods. It's worth noting that scholars read the Torah not as the work of monotheists, but rather the work of, I think the term is henotheists. Henotheists are those who believe, who know that there are multiple gods, but ours is the one true God. And that was generally the case throughout the Canaanite regions. The Canaanite peoples were all people for whom they knew about the whole Semitic pantheon. Okay, forgive me if this is like shocking for anybody, but the Torah is actually clearly not written by people who thought there was only one God, but rather they thought there were multiple gods. But this one that we refer to as Yud He Vav He, that's our God, and that's the one true God, better than all those other gods. And so the Canaanites, some of the Canaanites had Baal as their god, and some of them had Dagon, and some of them had there are other gods whose names, by the way, appear in our Tanakh in various places. But ours is the only true God, and God is reinforcing that for all of us to make sure that we understand. Again, I'm taking a dip into sort of this. You won't find this in the pages of the Talmud or Jewish interpretations. This is a scholarly approach to acknowledge the fact that the text does point to the existence of the Semitic pantheon. And there's a whole lot more that can be said about that, but we're trying to keep it streamlined here. Anything else about that passage? We got a few more that I'd like to get to if we can.
Yeah, I have a question for you. What if God is demonstrating his supreme infinite generosity by acknowledging that there are other gods, but his acknowledgement is in the for us, his acknowledgement means that we can extract rituals and some beliefs from the pantheon of gods, so that we can better understand the one God.
I think that there's certainly something to that. We have to be aware, or at least again for the ancient audience, they had to be aware that there are other gods, and what their rituals were. There are actually references to rituals for other gods in the Tanakh, but of course, yes, I think you're correct. Those things are supposed to lead us back, and hence this language about I'm the impassioned one. I'm Elkanah. I'm the zealous God, and you better stick with me. Yes, there are those other gods out there, but you better stick with me because I'm the real one. There's certainly a little bit of this. I'm better than all those, but you should be aware that those other ones are out there. They're not going to be as good for you. Okay. I'll tell you what, let's, again, we only have got 9 minutes left, and I have a hard stop at 1. So I hope you're all enjoying this. Let's, you know what, I'm going to skip 33:11. This 33:18 is the story about following the destruction of the molten calf, when God says to Moshe, I'm going to destroy all the Israelites and just create a new nation with you. And Moshe actually talks him out of it and says, no, you can't destroy those people. They made a mistake. They just left Egypt. They don't know what they're talking about. That we'll get this right. Give us another chance. We'll get this right. And Moshe says, by the way, just let me see. By the way, God, can I just see you? Because maybe up on Mount Sinai, God did not actually reveal God's physical presence. And God says, well, you can't actually see me and live. Now that's sort of interesting because, elsewhere the text says God speaks to Moshe face to face. It says that twice. And so in any case, we understand God's physical appearance to be somewhat dangerous. Maybe that's why Adam and Eve were afraid in the garden. Maybe that's why Moshe trembles a little when he encounters the burning bush, etc. But in any case, there's this problem that the Torah creates of, God's physical presence is not safe for humans to behold. But I actually love this particular passage. It's just fascinating because God says, Ani a'avir kol tuvi al panecha. I will pass all my goodness before you, not the bad parts. I'm going to show you just the good parts, and you'll be able to see those good things about who I am. Okay, so this is very interesting. Now, just after this, okay, can I get another? Beth Pomerantz, would you be willing to read for us this Exodus chapter 34, verse 6? If you're not unmuted, I guess that could be a no. Maybe how about Elisa? Are you there? Elisa, could you read this for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Adonai passed before him and proclaimed, I am Adonai. Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness.
Okay, I didn't reproduce the whole verse, actually two verses, but you all know this because we sing it over and over on Yom Kippur and at other times in Jewish life. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Vechanun, and this goes on for a little while longer. Total of 13 attributes, and I realize now I should have actually added the next verse because we cut that off. And some of you heard me say this before. When we get to V'nakeh, Adonai Ve'emet Notzer Chesed Lalafim Nosei Avon V'Fesha V'chata'a V'nakeh. That word V'nakeh actually, which sounds like it means and cleansing you of your sins, actually doesn't say that at all. Well, it says that, but then it says, and yet I will still hold you to account for I will surely not cleanse you for your sins, because I'm going to hold you account for generations for things you did wrong. Now, when we say this in synagogue, we never add that other part. Remember what I said, by the way, about that conscious editing. We edit God, but this is clearly not just a documenting of God's merciful attributes. It's also about the punitive ones. And God clearly, the Tanakh clearly sees God as that God is going to do good things and God can do bad things as well to us. So again, important to understand that that's a part of who God is. I want to leave just a few minutes to make sure that we can at least process a little bit of this about what we've covered. So we're going to have to stop at the text. The next one is just about when they build the Mishkan, God kind of moves in by God's presence filling the Mishkan. That's the end of the book of Exodus. Here is the end of the end of the Torah, which of course we read on Tuesday morning 2 weeks ago on Simchat Torah. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom God singled out face to face. There it is, panim el panim, face to face, for the various signs and portents, et cetera, et cetera. And nobody ever spoke to God face to face again, effectively. And just to give you an example, when we hear the commissions that the prophets receive to speak, it's as if God puts God's presence in their mouths, but God does not necessarily appear to these prophets. They receive sort of like magical, mystical transmissions. Isaiah has a dream in which he sees angels, etc., and etc. But it's a seraph that puts a hot coal against his tongue and says, "Your tongue is now holy and will say the word of God," etc. when we speak about, when we get to Psalms, which are poems that are written originally for prayer, there are many attributes that are ascribed to God. God is powerful. God breaks cedars, et cetera, et cetera. We all know this because we sing it in Shul. Havu l'Adonai b'nei lim, havu l'Adonai, et cetera, et cetera. Psalm 146, we say every morning, God is the one who sets prisoners free, restores sight to the blind, makes those who are bent stand up. This language is adopted into Siddur as God does these things. We say it in Birchot HaShachar, for the early morning blessings. We are grateful to God for all the things that God does for us. And by the way, that last line also important. We say in the Kedusha, Yimloch Olam Hayach Tzion, the Dor Vador, Hallelujah. God shall reign forever. So God is infinite. God is powerful. God does things for us. Again, later takes, but nothing really about God's appearance or God's values or attributes or personality. So much as just these are the things that God does, and we see, as I said again, over the sphere of the Tanakh, this sort of gradual distancing. So in the 2 minutes we have left, can I just shout out what are some of the things that we learned about God in passing through this language of the Tanakh? I'm going to stop there. Turn this off. Just call it out. What did we learn?
Well, for me, it seems to me that God is less a tangible entity than it is a fluid entity, that it can flow. He can flow in and out of us at will. He can put words in our mouth that we have no control over. He can make things come in and out of being. That God is such an all-powerful force that it can assume any shape or form or ability it wants.
Right. So God has, there are many different descriptors here that we've seen just in the Tanakh, and we haven't, like I said, we haven't gotten to what the rabbis are going to say in the rabbinic period. But God is given many different types of attributes, not so much about appearance, but something about like what God values, what is important to God, something about God's personality, something about God's feelings. Anything else that's of note?
God is empathetic.
God is, what did you say?
Empathetic.
Empathetic. Good. Paul, did you want to say something?
Yes, that God is impassioned and emotional and sometimes rash, and just the idea that it says in the beginning that we're going to make humans in our image, and that we really do reflect God with our emotions and how we act. Anyway.
Great. Okay, good. That we are a reflection of God, perhaps maybe in appearance as well, that might be suggested by Bereshit, but also certainly in the kind of emotional template, perhaps. Any other observations? And then we gotta go. Yes, Chris, go ahead.
I mean, maybe that there seem like a lot of different ideas of God in these passages.
Yeah.
And maybe the idea that the different authors of these different passages had very different ideas of God.
Absolutely. So actually, I think that's the thing I really want us to take away primarily from looking at the Tanakh, is that even in the ancient times, never mind schools of authorship, don't worry about that. But even in the ancient times, there were so many perspectives on God that are divergent, probably as well. That it lends to, in some sense, a wide range of understandings, of ways that we can understand it, even without getting to the later material. All right. With that, I'm going to ask that we recite Kaddish Drabanan. So I'm going to bring that up on screen. And our next session is December. Anyone know it's the first Tuesday in December, whatever date that is. And I will see you all then. We'll cover then some
The 6th.
Some passage. What is it?
6th.
December 6th. So we will, on December 6th, we will cover some rabbinic understandings, look at some passages from the Talmud in particular. Okay, so Kaddish Drabanan, I believe we have enough of folks here to count a minyan. Let's recite. I got that on screen there. Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alema Divra Kiruteh Ve'amlich Malchuteh B'chayechon V'yomechon V'chayei L'chol Beit Yisrael ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך בעולם לעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו. לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמם ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי תלמידי הון ועל כל מאן דעסקין באורייתא די ואתרא הדין ודי וכל אתר ואתר יהא להון ולכון שלמה רבה חינה וחסדה ורחמים וחיים אריכין וזונה רווחה ופורקה נא מן קודם מבון דבשמיא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיא וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו וברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. All right, thank you all so much for learning with me today. I'll see you soon. Take care. And more to read, obviously, if you want to read any more of that material a little more closely, you've got that link. And I will see you soon. Take it easy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye.